an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Uncrowned, chapters 14, 15, and 16, which I failed to read initially, thinking that I had gone far enough, and I hadn't, and it's the first time I've ever underread ever. In these chapters, Sophie, why you gotta be like this? Why did you have to kill the guy? Like, really? Fuck you. Fuck you. Fuck your family. Fuck your livestock. Fuck your everything about you. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Andy for commissioning this episode. So this was heartbreaking, guys. I think that normally I really have to make myself stop reading, and it's not easy. And this time at the end of chapter 15, I think I was just so devastated that I assumed that was where I was meant to stop. And it was way too early, actually. But really, that got to me, man. This writer is very good at establishing a connection between a reader and a new character. I wish I understood how that was done, because I know when it has been done. I can tell you when it's, achieved, but I can't put my finger on how to do it. And it's not even like I need to know. I'm not writing anything at the moment. I had been, but I sort of gave that up. And I just now, when the number of new people that you meet in this series, I mean, every chapter there's somebody new showing up practically, and I feel a real, there's something visceral about everyone you meet that you really get a sense of who they are. You really decide whether you like somebody or not. And the feeling with these rivals is so often, I want Lindon to win still, but I do like this guy and I don't want him to lose is the problem. And this really was oh, God. Anyway, I'm just kind of talking in circles here. Let me just get started so that I don't keep doing this. So, chapter 14. What Lindon decides he's going to do is indeed put the crown on Sophara in order to cause her to be pulled out, and she won't be able to, take the rest of them down. Now, as it happens, she kills Lindon within the competition before she gets pulled out, because you have to keep the crown on your head for a full minute before they actually activate and pull you out and say that you have won. And despite him managing to do that, he still gets killed, which honestly is a pretty shocking, awful moment. Despite knowing that he's okay, it was just a bit of a shock to read, and she just yanked his head off of him, She goes after him with this golden flame too. And he is somebody who is uniquely positioned to be able to withstand a fire-based attack. And yet it's still really brutal. He is, let's see. The light around Sophara turned white. His vision fuzzed. He was an inch from death. She faltered as she realized what had happened, and then her fury redoubled. Once again, her spirit surged to the skies, and she unleashed a tide of golden flame. There was no stopping it. Lindon braced himself behind his white arm, straining the hunger binding to its limits, weakening the attack as much as he could. No matter how much he siphoned its power, he was still swallowed by fire. He gritted his teeth instead of screaming as fire Madra covered him from head to toe. It was like trying to clutch a live coal in his bare fist. But as quickly as it had begun, it was over, and he hurriedly vented burning Madra from his arm. So he turns around at this point, and Ethan is dissolving because he got killed. And like everybody sort of knows that Ethan should have been able to dodge that. And he, for some reason, allowed himself to get got. Now, this all like probably ties into the fact that Ethan is really trying to cover his abilities, right? He's trying to keep people from realizing what he's actually capable of. So my assumption is that there is a difference in how, like, in the victory of somebody who doesn't get killed at all versus somebody who does. Like, he wants to reach the next level, Ethan does, but he wants to be seen as somebody who's less of a threat. So he lets himself, be taken down in order to perhaps, I think, keep his reputation from growing too much. It's a weird moment for it, but I suppose maybe I don't know. I feel like he's got all kinds of little games he's playing, and I don't really know what they are. So the aura of Ghostwater had faded from Sophara, but she still did not waste time. Her golden eyes touched on Lindon, but then they moved to the weakest enemy remaining, the one crouched and panting on the ground. Pride. So yeah, this moment, the two of them get got. Lindon landed between Sophara and Pride, driving his empty palm at her midsection. She didn't even slow down as her claws tore off Lindon's head. Which, I just really, guys, I can't tell you, when I was listening, I know that they survive this, but you forget for an instant, and I was still just like, what? And then we go to Zeal. You guys, I'm so excited about Zeal. I really am. Like, this character has my fucking attention. And I don't know what it is about him. I feel like it's the fact that he's so understated and bored by everything, when everybody else is so fucking bombastic and so driven. And he's just the opposite of that. And he has sort of captured my imagination. So Zeal, a bunch of people are in the chat here. Oh, it's active. What's up, guys? Carol says, you don't see how different he treats Saya. He is really warm on her and not trying to show her up. Think about how often he checks his tongue when talking to her. I haven't seen that very much, Carol, I have to admit. I don't know if that's a mild spoiler for later behavior that I haven't quite gotten to yet, but it doesn't feel like that to me as of right now. Andy says everybody loves Zeal, aka Eeyore. Oh God, he is though. He is, but it's like Eeyore, it feels just genuinely depressed. Zeal is certainly depressed, and a lot of that is based on what happened to him. But there's a feeling to him also of just being fucking over it. It's just, he has this sort of I'm not wasting my fucking energy getting all wrapped up in this shit when it doesn't fucking matter. And I honestly respect that. And then let's see. There's a short Zeal story out there. I want to read that. How many short stories are there? Is that the only one? If anybody wants to, when it's appropriate, eventually, if it's not a spoiler, link it. I will be very interested in reading it. But sorry, guys, I have to get back to the story because if I just chat with y'all on the chat, I am always over time with these episodes anyway. I will not finish in time. So we go to Zeal, and he has his hammer, which he was able to bring in his soul space, which was allowed. And it turns out that because his spirit is fractured, keeping something in there is incredibly painful, which sucks. And then we find out that the Stormcallers are specifically an enemy of his. I'm just going to read this little part. He knew the Stormcallers were here, and the champion of the Dawnwing sect would have hunted them down one by one with righteous fury in his heart. It wouldn't matter if he made it to the next round or not, so long as none of them did. But Zeal wasn't that man any longer. The memory of the weeping dragon taking up the sky, its living lightning decimating his students and friends, had played in his mind so many times that it scraped him raw. Dread gods couldn't be blamed for the destruction they caused. He might as well shout at a hurricane for daring to flood his house. It was the dread god cultists that had stoked his rage as they looted and pillaged in their master's wake. They had chased down the fleeing Dawnwing sect as rain and thunder poured down from the sky. Zeal had stayed behind to hold them off as his junior disciples and students escaped. It hadn't worked. As it turned out, one of the Weeping Dragon's lightning strikes had caused a landslide that wiped them all out. So Zeal's duel with the Sage of Calling Storms had been for nothing. He had lost, of course. Even at the height of his power, he was no sage. And instead of killing him, the leader of the Stormcaller cult had mutilated him, cutting apart his spirit and stitching it together wrong. Afterward, he had been allowed to live. Forced to live, almost. He was no threat to the Storm Sage, no threat to the Stormcallers without a sect behind him, and certainly no threat to the Weeping Dragon. That is brutal. It's really brutal in so many ways. Like, the fact that that is what this person chose to do to him, which I have to assume the Storm Sage is still out there and still alive. It's, like, just such a sadistic thing to do. It's awful because it turned out that it was for nothing. That's really the thing. Like, if he had managed to save his friends, I'm sure he would have been glad to sacrifice his spirit in order to do that. But he didn't actually succeed. And that really fucking burns, you know? And it turns out that he had been a champion of the Uncrowned King tournament once before. And he didn't think that he was going to be able to, like, qualify this time around. But it turns out he is exactly like the age limit. If he had only been a few months older, he wouldn't have been allowed to compete. Which feels super kind of cruel to him. Like, again, he just doesn't really want to be here. And I just really feel for him, you know? He feels like somebody who would just like to go retire. And yet he can't entirely let go. I'm going to go back into this to quote it directly here. The poison that ravaged his body had undone most of the enhancement Soulfire had given him, and holding anything, even Soulfire, in his soul space was like trying to hold a mouthful of needles. He might as well not be an Underlord. So this is really interesting that, like, I had thought that he had been sort of downgraded, and it's apparently not that simple. He comes across as downgraded. He comes across as like a true gold, but he's still technically Underlord, even though the way that his spirit can scan to other people doesn't seem to reflect that. Without Northstrider's personal request, he wouldn't have participated in the tournament. Not even when the monarch revealed that the Nine Cloud Court had methods of restoring his soul. Their royal Madra could do miraculous things to spirits. He only had to make it far enough in the tournament to earn a prize from them, and not coincidentally to improve Northstrider's reputation. Zeal still hadn't wanted to do it. What if the court could restore him to his former power? He had no sect left. There was nothing to fight for. Revenge did not return the dead. So at this point, he spots some gold light. And he's been keeping track of how many lights have been turning up for these crowns. He is basically what he's doing is letting the worst of the fighting be over by the time he goes and wades in to take one of these crowns, because he knows that it's going to be incredibly vicious out of the gate. And he's sort of hoping that by the time you're in the last third of the game, there aren't going to be enough people left for it to be too, not just with people who have taken crowns and been removed from the game, but you're also going to have people who got killed and are being held back. So he sees this gold, and apparently this is the 24th crown to show up. So it's been a while, and he feels like, all right, I guess I'll go for this one. And it's pretty close by. He had come this far, and it wasn't every day that you received a personal request from a monarch. He had to at least give it a token effort. I love this. He's still he's not even really trying. He's just kind of I'll make it look good, I guess. He goes through the forest, and even the animals that would normally attack are just kind of ooh, this guy doesn't give a fuck if he lives or dies. I think I'm going to pass. And eventually he comes up against somebody who is of the Stormcaller sect. And he looks at him, and there's a moment. Zeal shook himself as something stirred in the ashes of his heart. This didn't matter. The fight wasn't worth it. If he won, this one Stormcaller wouldn't really die. Even if his death was permanent, what of it? It would change nothing. Zeal turned, his gray cloak fluttering behind him. He could find another crown. "Dawn Wing," the Stormcaller exclaimed. The man recognized the symbol of Zeal's sect. He had been there that night. He should have kept his mouth shut. The next thing Zeal knew, his hammer was covered in blood that slowly dissolved into light. What a G! Honestly, though, I sincerely am just I'm trying to think who Zeal would be the most hilarious to bounce off of in terms of characters. I was going to say Mercy, but Mercy's so sort of good-hearted and really genuinely tries to be sensitive to people. Ethan and Zeal. Oh, that would be real bad. I want to see that. Thank you very much. Please put that on my list of things I want from this. So I got my answer about what happens when you get killed and taken out. It turns out almost no time passes, which honestly was a little bit of a bummer in a way, because I kind of wanted to see. I was hoping that there would be some getting to observe, but then I realized that would really give you quite an advantage, actually, to be able to watch everybody and see the way that they're doing it all. So the having it be almost as if that time hasn't passed at all is actually a really elegant solution to being to having this sort of handicap on somebody, but not give them any other, they're not getting to rest. They're not getting, there's nothing of an advantage to it otherwise. So they get dropped on the beach, him and Pride, because Pride also died. And, Pride has a crown, and Lindon looks at it and wants to know what happened to the other one. And he says, "My sister took one, Yaren Aurelius the other. She actually refused to take it. Mercy had to force it onto her head, just like you did to Sophara." And Pride says, "This is for you. I suggest you take it quickly. It hasn't been long since I won it." Brian says Pride didn't die. Oh, I'm sorry. I thought that they both popped up on the beach because they were both right there. So that's why he gives it to him. he knew that he would materialize there and was like, well, you saved my life, so I guess here, and shut up about it. He has a really big attitude. He gives it to him, but he's very like salty over it. Okay, well, that makes more sense, because I read that over a couple times, and the fact that he was right there, I just thought that they had both materialized at the same exact time, but he was just like, they returned to the spot that they originally showed up, so it wasn't like a surprise to him. That makes sense. Okay, thank you, everybody. I owe you nothing. Defend it on your own. That was nice, Dross said. I still don't like him. Amen. So then we go to Narusea. And she has this, it's sort of like sad, actually. Narusea is doing her best, and she is absolutely trying to keep her ego out of this whole thing and make this really about the team, which I really respect, and I think that's the right attitude to have. But she really doesn't feel like she is good enough for this. She's got a bit of an imposter syndrome thing happening here. It's a hard thing to know when you're in her point of view, whether or not she is correct about her assessment of herself or not. She feels that she doesn't have the kind of like incredible potential in her that Yeren has. And earlier, Yeren had tried to start a little bit of a like fight with her, just because, you know, Yeren, she's not trying to be malicious. It's just how she gets her jollies. It's fine. And Narusea did not like come back at her at all. And Yeren sort of thinks that it's just her attempting to be like focused, I guess, agreeable, and thus like stay focused on the task. But what it seems like is just that when Yeren kind of criticizes her, she seems to really take it to heart, because she doesn't feel that she's as good at this as Yeren is, and doesn't have the potential that Yeren has. So I think that Yeren just underestimated how seriously Saya was going to take it. And when she sees Athan, she says, "You didn't last any longer than I did," and in truth, it soothed her pride. He gave her a beaming grin. "I thought you could use the company. No telling how many crowns are left, but we should be able to grab a pair." And she says, "On one condition, you take the first. I'm not a fool. I know you didn't have to take that hit." And he says, "What? How dare you? Perish the thought." I enjoy that Athan doesn't really like, I won't say Athan doesn't lie. I feel like he tends not to, but I don't know for sure if he has like a distinct policy against it. I don't think he does, purely because Athan doesn't need to lie. He usually knows what's going on enough that he can just be very direct. He has enough power. He doesn't really have to worry often. What he does is much more like Faye-like, where he'll just sort of word things in a certain way or leave things out, and he's not exactly lying. And here it is. It hadn't been an easy journey for her, but Saya had eventually admitted the truth. She wasn't cut out for this. The more she trained against Yeren, the more she saw the girl's unlimited potential Saya didn't have. Besides, her true passion wasn't advancement. She just wanted her home to prosper. So this, like I said, I feel like this is a bit sad, because it's just her sort of putting this limit on herself. And I don't trust her judgment. I don't know her well enough as a character to tell whether or not she is right about herself. I feel like Athan I think he seems to believe in her, and he tends to have like a good idea of what people are capable of. But also, they did wind up in sort of a weird situation with Lindon getting pulled to the Akura clan. And I don't know if Athan's just trying to make the best of it because this is the team he has, or what. So, let's see. Only one of the Frozen Blade competitors made it out, none of the Akura backup team, which I was surprised by. Akura Grace told them how the team of dragons found them before they made it to Lindon, and she had been eliminated. When she returned, she hadn't been able to claim a crown in time. So at this point, they are awarded a weapon from the Archlord prize vaults. And this is honestly so much like, this is one of those things where I think it's just me not really having the kind of understanding of things that the people who live in this world do. Because to me, this does not sound like nearly as awesome a prize as a floating fucking fortress. But I could be really wrong about that. It feels like pretty subjective. But yeah, you can choose one sacred instrument. In future rounds, you will be permitted to use weaponry up to Archlord in your matches. Although, allow me to caution you that an Underlord weapon suited for you will produce far better results than an unsuitable Archlord weapon. God, I can't talk tonight. So after this, after you claim your prizes, you will fight in the third round. These will be one-on-one matches to the death, although of course the protection of the Honored North Strider is still in effect. However, because when she first said to the death, I thought they meant really to the death, and I was like, oh shit, my theory already is being borne out, but no. However, unlike later rounds, you are not competing as an individual, but as a team. Only when the last member of your opposing team loses will you be considered victorious. And when Lindon asks who their opponent is, they get to see this kid. I say kid. It says he looked older than 35. I think of him as a kid because it just feels like he doesn't have, who knows how long he's been like this, and what this is worn away at his mind, so he doesn't feel like he's fully there. So that makes him feel vulnerable, so then I call him a kid. He's not vulnerable in the way that I would think of it, but he still kind of is in his way. So you face the one remaining member of the Black Dragon team. He was registered in the tournament as the Black Dragon prisoner. His name is OG Blackflame. And everybody is like, word? Are you serious? Meanwhile, Lindon is looking at this kid, and he realizes that this is the effect of Black Flame on a human being. Because he saw it with Orthos, but it's a very different thing to see it in somebody who looks like you. And Mercy is just, she says, I'm sorry to do this to you, but it gets worse. We didn't do well enough in the last round. So, they don't have the strongest individual player. They don't have the most participants left. Their team isn't the strongest. There's nothing about where they are standing right now that makes them look good. So the really only thing that they can do is go in there and absolutely crush this kid. That's their option. And it really is so unfair the way this is set up, and it's super fucked up. Basically they're using a person who has lost their mind as a weapon, as a novelty, as a spectacle. It's really, really gross. It's not like he's consenting to this fight because he doesn't know any better. And it's very clear once Lindon is able to sort of restore him that he wants out of this. I feel like he knew what was going to happen, and he would rather that than what was going on, which was him being left in this state for God knows how long. I mean, it's super heartbreaking, guys. It really, really is. There's something about it that feels sort of almost like an old circus, where they would have a bear dancing on its hind legs, and they managed to get the bear to do that by burning it with pokers and stuff. It's just cruel and treating him like an animal. And it's, I hate it. So at this point, they're in the middle of talking about this, him and Mercy, and Fury just bursts in. And he says, the Monarch meeting is finally over. We're losing. And he talks about the little snake who is making the rest of us look bad. The cat and the snake are speaking with one voice, and thanks to little Sophara and those cults, the rest of them are listening. So Reagan Shen is the cat. The Dragon King is the snake. And this is when he mentions the thing that like was sort of, you know, I was bothered by it. I don't know if it was the last episode or the one before, where I was just like, how are they allowed to compete? Like the whole thing. And Mercy says, so it is about the Dread Gods. And he says, of course it is. You saw the teams that Shen brought. And did the other monarchs band together and kick him out? Didn't say a word. Any more than we did when the Nine Clowns put Miara as their team captain. Maybe I should slap on a wig and a veil and push around some underlords. So wait, does he know that she's the monarch, or does he just know that she's beyond an underlord? Does he, like, because it feels like he knows that she's a monarch. That felt like that. But I can't tell how much he is aware. I think because he's comparing her to himself, he has to know, or he wouldn't make that sort of comparison. But damn, so they know and they're just letting this shit fucking slide. I hate this. I really thought that Lindon knowing about it was going to be like a real dangerous thing for him to have this information. And it turns out it doesn't fucking matter. And I've been talking about this before, like the whole thing with what we've just gone through with this presidency, and sort of a lot of us have had this idea that we could rely on certain conventions to protect us from people just like barreling in and doing whatever the fuck they wanted, and finding out that really those conventions only hold up if all parties agree to them, and if they are actually, you know, if there are actual consequences, if somebody actually enforces them. And that's sort of what's going on here, is like, if everybody is just going to like sort of pretend that they don't know, Jesus. So let's see. More monarchs have died trying to kill the Dread Gods than any other way, but Reagan has the others convinced that he has found a way. He says he has a key to crack open the Western Labyrinth. He claims he'll use it as bait, drag the Dread Gods in, and the security measures on the maze will weaken them enough for us to kill them and craft their corpses into the most divine, powerful treasures the world has ever seen. The cults, of course, think he's just waking them up. And this is one of those moments where I'm like, yeah, the cults do think that. Are you sure that's not what he's doing? You know, like, it does not, we get some information about him later, and I'm like, I don't know what this dude's capable of, really. The first thing the Dread Gods will do is run straight through Akura territory to get what they're after. We take on all the risk. And, of course, Lindon's like, oh, yeah, not you, though, like my family would. Half the monarchs feel like cities and towns are only holding us back, and most of the other half are listening because there's nothing at stake for them. If it weren't for Northstrider, we'd have been run over already. I really, like, what is the cities and towns are only holding us back? I want to hear that argument. Is that... that sounds like something that dragons would say, because they just don't really have a lot of interest in civilization. But I don't know. And I love when he says Northstrider, Lindon's spirit shivered as a massive spiritual scan passed through the whole building. Fury tilted his face up. Yeah, I'm talking about you. No need to show off. Fury, you are delightful, sir. You really are. So he says, don't just win, send a message. Crush Nyan in 2 seconds, Mercy, and show them why they should be afraid of us. So Lindon asks if he can be the one to fight him instead, because everybody is aware of what a complete badass Mercy is, but he's working with Blackflame. He says we can show them that even when we play by their rules, using their paths, we are still stronger. And I don't know if he actually managed to accomplish that or not. It's unclear to me because he winds up getting killed. But it feels like what he managed to accomplish is significant enough that it may have made an impression. It's hard for me to tell. Well, we'll jump ahead. He says here, I have a plan. And you would think that when you see he's going to be taking Little Blue in his soul space, that I would have figured out that was what his plan was. But at first, it wasn't until the fight actually began that I realized, oh, wait, I know what he's going to do. I thought he had just brought Little Blue because he was planning to use her to reinforce himself and heal him because he knew he was going to be using primarily Blackflame in this fight. And he wanted to, have a way to cleanse his channels and make it so that he wasn't like in pain. But no, he has this as like a hopeful antidote or at least something to ease this dude's suffering. So this is when we get Regan Shen, Monarch of the House Shen, Path King's Key. Regan Shen is its creator and sole practitioner. A force path touched by the authority of space. What? As a jade cub, he was lucky enough to bond with a sage's remnant that had some command over space. His path involves control over an extra-spatial vault in which he stores weapons, techniques, and even enemies. And he is a creature of ambition. If he had been allowed to continue his life uninterrupted, he would have led his tribe to unprecedented prosperity. And then there is the Dread War. And he really, there's this sense of power here that he can't resist. His goal, to find out the identity of these godlike beings whose battle had broken the earth and spread across the sky. The same year he began his search, the Dread War concluded. The two surviving monarchs convened the handful of heralds and great families remaining in the world. Together they organized the Uncrowned King tournament in an effort to pool their resources and raise up a new generation of monarchs. Regan Shen reached these families just as they had begun their search for powerful underlords. He was the victor of the first Uncrowned King tournament, and that fortune became the foundation for decades of conquest. He has a reputation as a conqueror, a glory seeker, an imperialist, and a daring innovator. Ruthless and cruel to everyone but his own people, whom he is generous with. When he approached the 4 Dread God cults, promising them each that he intended to awaken their masters for good, they had no reason to doubt him. And then it's followed with Suggestion, the life and death of Gaian Aurelius. And we find out later that he was responsible for not only that monarch's death, but also the disruption of the Aurelius family in general. But we don't get the full story on it, despite Yaren very pointedly asking for it, which I really would like. So we go into chapter 15, and this is where Lindon is preparing for his battle. And I was really surprised, not upset, mind you, but this is really going along at quite a clip. We don't have a lot, there's a week between each round, or at least a week. I think it might be more, but we don't really see any of the in-between time, which I'm not mad about, but it does surprise me. We got to fit all of this into one book, I suppose. So that's fine. And I really appreciate how dross is how concerned he is for little Blue. He keeps on just being to Lindon. He keeps saying stuff like, don't let her get hurt. Okay. No, but seriously, don't you fucking let her get hurt. Like, he's trying to be kind of blasé about it. And then he realizes, no, this actually is like important to me. Let me really say this to you. So he has a shield that is made out of a turtle shell, and he feels like Orthos would really have liked this. And there is, let's see, at the touch of his Madra, a sword hovered above him and behind his shoulder. It was a real sacred instrument, masterfully crafted and covered in elegant script. The double-edged blade was wide and tinged with just a hint of blue, its runes stylized to look like crashing waves. The hilt and guard were a pale green that reminded him of wind aura and hand-carved with the images of powerful gusts. Wave Dancer was the weapon's name, and it was a masterpiece. Its archlord spirit was as graceful as its physical form, and it had no binding, so he could use it even as an underlord. According to the description from its creator, it was meant to, quote, bend the swiftness and power of an ocean storm to the protection of its owner. Yeah, which is a pretty, like, it just sounds really cool. So I'm going to jump ahead a little bit more because, as usual, I only have like 20 minutes left, and I really have a lot more to cover. So he steps into the circle to get scanned, and I think that he's maybe a little bit worried about whether or not little Blue being in his soul space is going to be allowed, but it seems fine. And when he comes out, they really make a big deal about how it's Blackflame versus Blackflame here. And here comes the skeletal young underlord rushed out, flecks of spittle flying from his unrestrained snarl. I just hate this. Like, he's just completely out of his mind, apparently being starved. You know, just the whole thing is so awful. And Lindon, when he sees him in person, is really startled at like how much worse he looks in person than he even did in the images that he saw. And Lindon has to ask that this dude be like, he sees that he is still shackled, and Lindon's a little bit worried that they are going to allow this dude to stay shackled while they fight, and he's not okay with that. And he goes up and tells Northstrider that he's going to be the one that goes first. And when Northstrider looks over at Lindon and sees the worry, and Lindon asks if he'll be unbound, he says, "Do not let compassion disarm you. He is no less deadly for his condition." And I really appreciated that it's not exactly that Northstrider is like unfeeling about this. Although I don't think that he feels particularly, we've seen the way he behaved, right? In Ghostwater. Like, he is a brutal and very like self-satisfied person. But I appreciated that he acknowledges what Lindon is feeling and is more just like, okay, you can feel some pity for him, but you can't let that influence the way that you decide to handle this. You're going to have to like address that and move forward anyway. So I won't beat by beat through this fight. Suffice to say, this dude is a little bit outside of Lindon's weight class. Lindon has a pretty good fucking handle on his Blackflame for the place that he is in currently. And yet, this is an original. This guy has been using Blackflame for far longer, was taught also a different type of path because his gold sign is the tail, or his sign. Is that considered a gold sign? because I don't think I think a gold sign is usually something that happens as a remnant, with a remnant, isn't it? Is Lindon's gold sign his eyes turning red? Is that a thing that you would consider a gold sign? But it's not there all the time. So that feels like, I feel sort of jealous of the fact that his get to like sort of disappear if he's not using his technique actively. Carol says Lindon doesn't have a sign, but the eyes are just as good. But everybody else is saying that, yeah, that is his gold sign. The tail was a Blackflame family gold sign. Okay. It would be there all the time, except that he can switch cores. Oh, right. Okay, I forgot that he can do that, and so it would be, I gotcha. Oh, that's interesting. So then if Yaren had, like, 2 different cores, would her, like, although I was gonna say the swords would go away, but now that she's Underlady, she can put them away. They can disappear into her back, which is pretty cool. Okay, cool. There's like so much about the way that things work in this world that I still am getting used to. And especially when there's like soulsmithing or a description of like why certain weapons work or don't work, I have to admit, I will just let the information sort of wash over me without complete comprehension sometimes. And it's fine. I don't feel like it really affects my enjoyment of the story at all. But I would enjoy some flashcards, maybe? Something like that. So he gets burned in this fight pretty fucking badly, and he like gets through it, but it's not like it doesn't affect him at all. And at this point, Nyan starts using Void Dragon's dance, and Lindon and him begin to fight for control over it. And it's really kind of an interesting scene with their spirits being the things that are battling rather than them physically battling each other. And in the end, neither of them actually gets a handle on it. It's just that it explodes outward because it's torn between the two of them. And let's see, but Lindon wouldn't win a contest of Blackflame, but this had always been about wasting his opponent's Madra. The weaker the path of Blackflame was in Nyan's spirit, the more control his mind would have. And at this point, he asks Dross, can you numb my pain? And Dross says, basically, if it weren't for the fact that you couldn't actually die here, this would be a really fucking stupid idea. But, considering that you won't die, okay, yes, I can. And Nyan's sword gets him right in the gut. And everybody starts cheering, which honestly would really hurt my feelings. I don't know about you guys, but if I'm out there just like fighting against this person who is like a caged animal and they get me and then everybody starts cheering, I just feel like I would feel a fucking way about that. I can't help it. I would be a bit salty. I'm just saying, you're like, I'm one of your champions, supposedly. What the fuck, guys? But Lindon can't feel it. And finally, he gets Little Blue out, and she jumps onto this guy, and she looks really sad as she does it. I feel there's a combination of her like being worried about Lindon and seeing the state that Nyan's in and being like, Jesus Christ, you know? And she jumps out there and manages to pull him out of this for an instant. He sort of goes stiff for a second all over, like he's being electrocuted. And then a harsh, disused voice grated from Nyan's throat. You pulled me out. How? But Lindon couldn't stay awake anymore. He sensed his spirit one more time where Little Blue was curled up between his cores, safe. He could relax. So yeah, this moment was really sort of touching, and he reached out his right arm and used the hunger binding Madra flowed into him. The less Madra Nyan had, the better, though it was hard for Lindon to remember why. I really liked that. As much as he can't feel the pain of this thing being like right through his gut, it's still interfering with his thinking and his functioning. And let's see, Dross begins yelling at him too, to pull her back, and there's a moment there where I started to wonder, is Lindon going to be able to? Because he seems so out of it. But he stayed locked in place, gazing through Lindon. So Lindon doesn't actually... Oh yeah, here it is. Even his tail froze, and he showed no reaction as a sword plunged into his back. So Nyan gets skewered himself, but it's still considered a win for Lindon, I guess, because he doesn't actually vanish immediately, I would guess, is like sort of that's the metric that they use for whether you actually lose, is the fact that you, quote, die in the game. And somehow, because Lindon stays conscious and is able to force his way through it, he doesn't die properly. So I guess he is considered to be the winner of this. Because he's not, he doesn't vanish. He doesn't pass out. I don't know. Ofer says Lindon died first. He lost. Oh. But he didn't die. Well, I guess he does, because he winds up passing out. So yeah, despite actually being able to help Nyan, you're right. He still does pass out and die first. So, okay. Fair. So he comes to, and he has no idea how much time has passed since, the match and whatnot. He, celebrates a little bit with Dross and Little Blue, and Lindon is watching how Nyan is now up against Mercy. And his sword flashed in complex patterns, striking arrows from the air as he used his free hand to launch Dragon's Breath that severed a tree in the middle and forced Mercy to jump down. Eventually, they get to a point where she's got her arrow on him and there is no way for him to get away. And he concedes rather than trying to continue to fight. And it's a moment for the audience of being very disappointed. They're here to see a fight to the death. And him saying, I surrender, this is not what they're fucking here for. They want to see this guy get torn apart. They want to, and honestly, it is sort of surprising that they don't just follow this through with to the death, because he's not actually dying when that happens. So, but it's appropriate considering that she's called Mercy, I suppose. Mercy's armor dissolved and her bow shifted back into a staff. She bows to him and he bows back. And then the kid goes up and speaks to Northstrider and says something to him. And Northstrider just says one word back to him, and Lindon's like, oh, what are they saying? I want to know. At this point, I just hate this part so much, guys. I don't even really want to talk about it. Across the ashen arena, Nyan Blackflame walked into his waiting room where Sophara was waiting for him. The gold dragon did not seem furious as Lindon had expected. Her arms, with their layers of jeweled bracelets and smattering of gold scales, were folded. She tapped her foot impatiently, staring across the arena herself. Her eyes locked on Lindon's. Nyan bared his teeth, waving his chains as he shouted something at her. And she just moves her one hand and, I assume, cuts his throat, and he just falls. And there's a moment where Lindon is like, but he's not really dead, right? But he knows that the kid's really dead because he's just laying there with his unseeing eyes. And that's not what happens when you die in the game. You evaporate. You dissolve and disappear. And it's awful. And when he goes back and speaks to Mercy, the thing he says is just to spite us. Which, yeah, that's one of those things that if you're not that kind of person, it can be really shocking to see what somebody will stoop to just like kind of get one in. And it's something that I truly will never understand, because those sorts of things don't help anybody. But people like that don't want to help. That's the point. And Northstrider at this point swoops in and says dragons are beings of destruction. They would rather see a field reduced to ash than see someone else have a bite to eat. And that was just a fucking word, man. I have known some people like that. It is such a bummer. It really is. And Lindon says, I'll take care of her, in a way that makes me feel like, oh, he's gonna. Like, at other points, it's been a fight that he's just hoping to get through because he wants to get through it to be able to protect his family later. He wants to be able to get through it so that he can advance. He just has a natural, like, oh, I don't want to die, and hopefully I'll survive this. This is the first time that I feel like he's going to be going looking for a fight. And not necessarily right away, because he knows he can't take her yet. But he's got her in mind in a way that he didn't before. She was pursuing him because she had a grudge, and he was very aware of her because she was coming after him. But now it's mutual. They are each here to take the other out. And I am absolutely interested. And then Northstrider's golden eyes flicked between them before settling on Lindon. Your opponent asked for his last words to be delivered to you. Lindon felt a pang in his heart. Last words. So Nyan had expected what happened to him. He said, the dragon advances. Now, is it any wonder, you guys, that I stopped there and thought that I was done? Because I was, in my mind, I was done. In my heart, I was done. But there's one more chapter left, chapter 16. And this is where we get a little bit of what is going on with the Aurelius family. This is such it's so slowly unfolding, and I am really, really curious about all of this. Yaren she's meeting Varys, who is the underlady. I hope I'm saying her name right. I don't remember how it's pronounced in the audiobook. I'm not sure, actually, because I've read this one, if I even heard her name pronounced in the audiobook. But she has like one of those sort of like lanky builds that gives her a lot of reach and makes her like a good runner. And then there's Altavian. And Ethan is really excited to see them. And I wasn't exactly sure how he was going to react to seeing them. So I was pleased that he was so warm, you know. I was he always is, so I don't know why I was concerned about it. But it just seems like such a strange situation, being sort of separated away from your family and competing against them right now. And I wasn't sure how they would receive him either, you know. And she says, 5 people with the name Aurelius passing the second round. I hope that burns him to the bone. And she says him, the way that people say, you know who. Apparently, just trying to say his name is going to draw his attention, and she's avoiding it. But Ethan has no compunction about this at all. And it's just like, man, he absolutely is paying attention to everything that we say about him. He knows how we feel already. He knows what he did, and we know what he did. I'm not going to just like not try and draw his attention. Fuck that. We all know where we stand, and there's no reason to try and be secretive about this. Now, she sort of says a bit of caution would not go amiss, and I see what she means. But also, I understand where Ethan's coming from as well. I doubt he thinks we have a positive opinion of him after he killed our monarch and shattered our home. And Yeren says, I wouldn't hate hearing that story, which is such a good line. I love Yeren so dearly. She's great. And Varys says, the point remains that this is a good omen. No matter which of us wins, the Aurelius name will echo across the world. Aethan said. That might have been agreement. And I feel like it wasn't. It might have been. I don't think it was. I don't know. I'm just saying. So then he says the Black Flame portal to the homeland opens in about 2 years. I would very much like to meet you there when it does. I believe we may be able to help each other. It just opens into, like, what? We don't know anything about this. Obviously, don't tell me, guys. But that's like, it's, why is that necessary? Just go home, can't you? Mordecai says he mentioned this in Blackflame. Oh, I don't remember. He says it opens every 10 years. Ooh, I don't remember that. See, this is why I'm re-listening with Owen, so I can be refreshed on this shit. So the scripted stone door of their waiting room slowly slid open, revealing an arena that had totally changed once again. So this one is filled with these like weird, like pillars, and there are alleys sort of made by them. It's very maze-like. And at first Yaren's sort of like, why is this set up this way? And then she realizes that they know that it's going to be Aurelius fighting, and that their whole thing is their like awareness and their sense of one another. And if they are unable to rely on their eyes and their ears in a reliable way, then they have to use those senses. So they have created an arena that will distort sound, that will keep people out of view, and just generally make it more of like a hide and seek thing, and trying to anticipate moves using that sort of mental ability sort of way. And I had thought that Aethan and Cassius were the only two who had that ability left. But I guess they mean the only two in Blackflame that had that ability, and the rest of the Aurelius family has it. It's just that they weren't around, because it seems like she's using that when she's fighting him. And Yeren is watching this fight, and I love this. She decides, first, she's talking to Aethan. They had discussed their strategy already, but Aethan had directed her to focus on preparing for either fight. She had a plan against Varys and Altavian both, but he had dodged any questions about which of them would fight first. She assumed he wanted to decide at the last moment. Aethan leaned over so they were eye to eye, looking into her. A moment later, his hand blurred as he slapped her on the side of the head. It didn't quite hurt, but she instantly responded by stabbing at him with one of her gold signs. He slid casually to one side. You trying to get me ready to stab an Aurelius? Just checking. I don't see it in you yet. Why don't you watch me first? It might be good for you. So, that's what they do. He goes in first, and let's see. Oh, sorry. There's so much chatter tonight. There's more people here than usual, so I'm just like having trouble keeping up. Aethan and Cassius weren't even the only two on the Blackflame continent. They were the only two blood members of Aurelius who were specifically present in Serpent's Grave. Ah, okay. That's what it is. So Yeren watches this fight, and she has a feeling like they're sort of just toying with each other at first, and is a little bit irritated by it. And she finally decides that she's going to try and use her senses to watch rather than her eyes, the way that she had been. And it takes a while for her to zero in the way that she needs to. And finally, she begins to sense something. Jump, she thought, and Aethan leapt away from a crackling claw of Madra that erupted from the ground beneath him. Yeren spent her time trying to memorize the feeling of this elusive state. She wasn't sure if it had to do with the instinctive skill of the Sword Sage's remnant or her evolving spiritual perception, but she suspected both. Ethan moved as quickly as he ever had in their sparring matches and used the 4 techniques she'd seen him use, which I feel like he's got more than that. That's what she's seen, and he's using what she has seen, I am assuming. She felt the turn of the fight an instant before it happened. Varys slipped out from cover to launch a forged hawk of Storm Madra at Ethan, and she lingered a beat too long. Yeren felt it. That's the game, she thought. Ethan's blast of pure Madra clipped her shoulder, slowing her next striker technique for only a second. From there on out, Ethan had the advantage, and she was on the back foot. In seconds, Ethan had her backed into a corner, driving his scissors up under her ribs. And I was just like, well, shit, that is brutal. I love, too, that he got his weapon reward, but it's something that could shapeshift, and so he turns it into those tailor shears again, fabric scissors. So Yeren snaps back, and he comes in and is just like, so, how was that? And she's like, I think I'm getting it. It was weird. And he pulls out a fucking blindfold, and she's like, I'm sorry. Are you interested in watching me lose? And basically what Ethan says is, I mean, if you lose, you lose, but this will gain you a lot, so it's worth it. And Yeren is not prepared to sacrifice a round for this experiment, but at the same time, she has grown so used to Ethan being fucking right about everything that she can't help but be like, if he says that I should probably do this, then I probably should. Fine. So she takes her blindfold from him and walks up and prepares to go in. She's going up against Altavian. She calmed her breathing. She wrapped the blindfold around her eyes. Noise from the crowd surged in response. What's this? The Nine-Cloud Soul cried excitedly. Contestant Yeren has begin, North Strider said. I fucking love North Strider. He is not interested in this fucking hype man. He is wanting to play the game. Can we get to it, please? Shut up. And honestly, I feel him a little bit on that. Yeren's spirit cried a warning, and then she was cut. And I was like, oh no! And that's the end of that chapter. So I have no idea what's coming here. I don't know, obviously, if she's going to win or not. I would like her to win. Also, if she loses, I'm like, then what? How would that go? It's sort of an odd, I don't think that I really fully understand this round, actually. Now that I say this, I don't really have time to get into it. But if Lindon lost and then Mercy won, that feels like they were each fighting the same opponent. So they wind up beating him in the end, and that seems like a victory. But if Ethan wins against one of them, and Yeren fails against the second one, does that still count as a win? Ofer says you lose as much as you have members in your current team, and you lose the round. That's not helping. I'm sorry. Jake says you lose or advance as a team. You're out when everyone has lost. Okay, but if she loses this one, does that mean she's out? Oh, Brian says Ethan would get a shot at the guy Yeren lost to. Oh, I thought that was only the case with Lindon and Mercy, because that dude was the only one. If Ethan wins, they both advance. If he goes up against the second guy she lost, and okay, I get you. I see what you're saying. Interesting. Okay. Huh. Weird. So if Lindon won the first time and Mercy lost, would Lindon have to fight the same dude a second time? That feels like kind of, if Lindon won, Mercy would not have fought. Ah, I get ya. Okay, gotcha. Okay, I see. Well, I have to go because I am over time as usual. But I appreciate you guys all walking me through some of this, because this is like a little bit complex here. We're getting into this, and there's just a lot. There's a lot. That's all there is to it. There's a lot to keep track of. So I hope that y'all are enjoying the coverage nevertheless, and that I'm bringing something to you. And thank you again, Andy, very much for commissioning it. And until Friday, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
That was an Unspoiled Network podcast.